After 30 years on this bench, I've been threatened before. Angry defendants who didn't like my ruling. People who thought that raising their voice or dropping the right name would somehow rearrange the outcome of their case. I've seen all of it. None of it has ever moved me a single inch. But on a Tuesday morning in March, the son of our city's mayor walked into my courtroom for what was supposed to be a routine traffic hearing. And within 90 seconds of opening his mouth, he made a threat so brazen, so breathtakingly arrogant, so utterly lacking in any self-awareness whatsoever, that I did something I had done only twice in my entire career. I had him handcuffed and arrested right there in open court before he could finish his sentence. What happened in the 5 minutes that followed taught this entitled 24-year-old a lesson about power and consequence that his father's money, his father's title, and his father's connections had never once managed to teach him in 2.5 decades of trying. You're watching Justice Warrior. And if you've ever watched someone hide behind their family name like it was body armor, subscribe right now, because what you're about to see is what happens when that armor finally fails. My clerk, Margaret, came into my chambers that morning with the day's docket. Standard Tuesday. Traffic violations, small claims, the usual business of a municipal court doing what municipal courts do. Judge, she said in the tone she uses when she wants to give me information without editorializing about it. We have Mayor Mitchell's son on the docket this morning, Brandon Mitchell, reckless driving. I looked at the file. Brandon Mitchell, age 24, son of Mayor Robert Mitchell, who had been running this city for 6 years, cited for driving 85 miles an hour in a 35 miles per hour zone, ran 2 red lights, nearly caused a multi-car collision. What's his record? I asked. Margaret pulled up his history. This is his 4th traffic violation in 18 months, she said. The previous 3 were all dismissed. No fines paid, no points added to his license, just dismissed. I raised an eyebrow. On what grounds? She chose her words carefully. The notes say administrative dismissal. But Judge, we both know what that means. We did. Someone with influence had made phone calls. Someone had ensured that the mayor's son glided through 3 separate incidents without consequence, without so much as a mark on his record. The system had been gently, quietly bent around him, not broken, just shaped to accommodate his particular last name. I flipped to the arresting officer's report from the March incident. A young patrol officer named Diaz, who had pulled Brandon over near the intersection of Fountain and 9th. Diaz had written in the careful, formal language officers use when they suspect a report might someday be scrutinized that the defendant had asked him mid-stop whether he knew whose son he was talking to, and had then attempted to photograph the officer's badge number for later. Diaz had cited him anyway. I closed the file. Well, I said, that ends today. At 9:30, I walked into my courtroom. Approximately 30 people in the gallery, normal mix, people waiting for their own cases, a few observers, the usual flow of a busy municipal docket. And sitting in the front row, one leg crossed over the other, scrolling through his phone with the relaxed focus of a man who has nowhere important to be, was Brandon Mitchell. Designer suit, the kind that costs more than some people's monthly rent. Hair arranged with careful casualness. When I entered, everyone in the courtroom stood. It's a matter of respect. Not for me personally, but for what the bench represents. Every single person in that room rose. My bailiff, Officer Rodriguez, former Marine, 20 years of service, a man whose patience is extensive but not unlimited, noticed immediately. Sir, Rodriguez said, stand up when the judge enters. Brandon looked up, not with embarrassment, with annoyance. The specific annoyance of someone interrupted during something they consider more important. What? Stand up. Show some respect. Brandon rolled his eyes slowly, deliberately, making sure the roll was visible to everyone in the room, and rose from his seat with the theatrical reluctance of a man performing a great favor for people who don't deserve it. Then he sat back down and returned to his phone. I let it go for now. I called several other cases first. A woman with an expired registration who apologized to the court twice and thanked me once. A man who'd run a stop sign explained himself clearly, accepted his fine without drama. a teenager there with his mother who had been caught skateboarding through a closed construction zone and who stood so rigidly at attention while I spoke to him that I had to suppress a smile. Normal cases, normal people conducting themselves with basic dignity in a space that deserved it. The quiet, unglamorous machinery of a system that mostly works because most people, when asked to show up and be accountable, simply do. Then I called his case number, PVD-2025-3-2847, City of Providence versus Brandon Mitchell. Reckless driving, excessive speed, running traffic signals. Brandon stood and walked to the defendant's table the way someone walks into a room they already own. Confident, unhurried, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He was still holding his phone, still apparently in the middle of something more interesting than his own court appearance. "Mr. Mitchell," I said, "put the phone away." He glanced at me, executed another eye roll of impressive amplitude, and slowly, deliberately slowly, tucked the phone into his jacket pocket. "Can we make this quick?" he said. "I have a tea time at 11. The courtroom went quiet. The specific quiet of 30 people simultaneously registering that someone has just said something almost unbelievably inappropriate. "Mr. Mitchell," I said evenly, "you are here because you were cited for reckless driving, 85 miles per hour in a 35 miles per hour zone. That is 50 miles over the posted limit. You also ran 2 red lights and very nearly caused a serious accident involving multiple vehicles. Do you understand these charges?" He shrugged, one shoulder barely. "Yeah, whatever. I'll just pay the fine. How much is it?" "This isn't about paying a fine," I said. "This is your 4th traffic violation in 18 months. Under Rhode Island law, that triggers a mandatory court appearance and a mandatory review of your driving privileges, including possible suspension of your license." He laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable laugh, an actual, genuine laugh. The kind you produce when someone has said something you find genuinely amusing. "License suspension," he repeated, tasting the words like they were a joke he was still processing. "Yeah, that's not going to happen." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you know who my father is?" And there it was. 4 words delivered with absolute confidence. The sentence that entitled people reach for like a weapon, because for Brandon Mitchell, for 24 years, it had been one. "Yes, Mr. Mitchell," I said, "I know exactly who your father is. He is the mayor of Providence, and that fact has absolutely no bearing on what happens in this courtroom today." He tilted his head slightly like I had said something confusing. "Actually, it does," he said. "My dad makes one phone call, and this goes away just like the last 3 times. So let's skip whatever this is and just tell me what I owe." I sat back in my chair. Subscribe to Justice Warrior right now, because what comes next shows what happens when someone who's never heard the word no meets a judge who means it. 43 years on the bench. I have seen arrogance. I have seen entitlement. I have seen people try to use every kind of leverage available to them. Wealth, status, connection, tears, fury, charm. But there is a specific quality to the arrogance of someone who has never once been told no by a system that was supposed to tell them no. And I was looking at it in its purest possible form. If you're feeling what I was feeling at that moment, subscribe to Justice Warrior right now and share this with someone who needs to see that privilege is not a permanent shield. Because what Brandon Mitchell does in the next 60 seconds changes everything. "Mr. Mitchell," I said, keeping my voice entirely calm, "let me be very clear with you. Your father is the mayor of this city. He has considerable power and influence in many rooms. This courtroom is not one of them. No phone call from him, from his office, from his attorney, or from anyone connected to him is going to alter what happens here today. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" His smirk faded by a fraction. "Are you threatening me?" I am explaining how the law works, I said. Now, do you have anything substantive to say about the charges before this court? He reached into his pocket and pulled his phone back out. Yeah, he said, holding it up and pointing it directly at me. I have something to say. I'm recording this for when my dad's lawyer sues you for harassment. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward immediately. Sir, put the phone down right now. Brandon pulled back. Don't you come near me. Do you have any idea who I am? Touch me and I will have your badge before the end of the week. I stood up. In 30 years on this bench, I have raised my voice perhaps a handful of times. This was not one of them, but I stood and the room understood what that meant. Mr. Mitchell, I said clearly, you are in contempt of this court. You will put that phone away immediately or you will be taken into custody. This is not a negotiation. This is not a conversation. Put the phone away. And then Brandon Mitchell made the single most consequential mistake of his 24 years of consequenceless living. He looked directly at me, phone still recording, smile returning. You can't touch me, he said. My father owns this city. He owns you. And if you don't dismiss this case right now, I will make sure you lose your position. I will make sure you never work in this state again. I will personally make sure you are destroyed. The courtroom erupted. Gasps. Someone said, "Oh my God," clearly enough to be heard across the room. The prosecutor's mouth fell open. A woman in the back row covered her face. People looked at each other with the wide eyes of witnesses to something they are going to be describing for years. I looked at Officer Rodriguez. Bailiff, I said, arrest Mr. Mitchell, contempt of court and threatening a public official. Brandon's face traveled from arrogance to shock in less than a second. The particular shock of someone who has played a card that has always worked before and is watching it fail for the first time. What? You cannot arrest me? Officer Rodriguez moved. 20 years of Marine discipline, 20 years of law enforcement, and not a single wasted motion. He had Brandon's wrist, had him turned, had the handcuffs secured in under 5 seconds. Clean, efficient, professional, beautiful in the way that competence under pressure always is. Get your hands off me! Brandon was shouting now, all composure gone, all performance gone. Just a young man in an expensive suit who had crossed a line he didn't know existed until he was standing on the other side of it. My father is the mayor. You cannot do this. I'll sue every one of you. Your father, I said, my voice carrying clearly over his, is not in this courtroom, and he has no authority here. You have just threatened a sitting judge in open court. That is a felony, Mr. Mitchell. You are under arrest. This is insane. My father will. Your father, I said, will do nothing. Officer Rodriguez, please remove Mr. Mitchell and hold him for arraignment on contempt charges. Subscribe to Justice Warrior because what happens next will change everything. They took him toward the side door. He was still talking, still threatening, still invoking his father's name like a talisman that had simply stopped working. And then the door closed and you could hear him continuing down the hallway. And then you couldn't hear him at all. Silence. 30 people looking at the bench. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, settling back into my chair, let that serve as a reminder. I don't care who your father is. I don't care what your family name is. I don't care how much money you have or what connections you believe protect you. In this courtroom, everyone stands equal before the law. And if you threaten this court, you will face the consequences of that choice every time. I adjourned for 15 minutes and went to my chambers. I called Mayor Robert Mitchell. He answered on the first ring. Judge Milian. His voice was tight. I just heard what happened. Mayor, your son was just arrested for contempt of court and threatening a public official. He is being held for arraignment. Silence. Then he what? He threatened to have me removed from my position if I didn't dismiss his charges. He told me you own me. He told me you own this city. He said he would personally destroy me while recording it on his phone in open court in front of 30 witnesses. A long silence, the kind that has genuine weight in it. Then a sound that I recognized after 43 years of this work. A father understanding fully and completely what his son has done. Judge, he said, I don't know what to say. I am ashamed. Mayor, with respect, this is his 4th citation in 18 months. The first 3 disappeared. Someone made calls. Someone bent the process. That ends today. I understand, he said. It should have ended a long time ago. What happens now? He'll be arraigned on contempt charges this afternoon. Bail will be set, and then his reckless driving case will be heard properly without any administrative maneuvering. No dismissals, no phone calls. He faces whatever the evidence supports. Another pause. Then I wouldn't have it any other way, Judge. What he did was completely unacceptable. You have my word, no interference. Subscribe to Justice Warrior right now, because what comes next shows something rarer than a judge with a backbone. It shows a father with enough love for his son to finally let him fall. 3 hours later, Brandon Mitchell was brought back into the courtroom for his contempt arraignment. Still in handcuffs, no longer smirking, he'd spent 3 hours in a holding cell with people for whom a holding cell was not a novel or theoretical experience. 3 hours of a reality that designer suits and tea times and administrative dismissals had never permitted him to encounter before. One of the other men in the cell, an older man waiting on a bench warrant for missed child support payments, later told a court officer that Brandon had spent the first hour pacing and demanding to speak to someone in charge, and the last 2 hours sitting silently on the bench with his head in his hands, saying nothing at all. The attorney standing beside him was not the expensive private lawyer he would have expected his father to dispatch. It was a public defender, competent, professional, and representing clients who couldn't afford anything else. Your Honor, the public defender said, my client would like to address the court and offer an apology for his conduct this morning. I looked at Brandon. His eyes were red. Whatever had happened in that holding cell, it had reached something. Mr. Mitchell, I said, you have the floor. He could barely speak. His voice came out unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with performance. Your Honor, he said, I'm sorry. I was completely out of line. I was disrespectful to this court, to you, to Officer Rodriguez, to everyone in this room. I said things that were wrong and threatening and inexcusable. I am genuinely sorry. Let me ask you something, I said. Are you sorry you did it, or are you sorry you got caught? He looked up at me, held my gaze. Both, he said, but mostly, I'm sorry I did it. Because sitting in that cell for 3 hours, I kept thinking, this is who I've become. This is the person 24 years of never facing a consequence has made me, and I don't like that person at all. His voice cracked slightly. I hate what I've turned into, Your Honor, and I'm not saying that because my lawyer told me to. I'm saying it because it's true. I studied him. In this job, you learn to read the difference between genuine remorse and a coached performance. I've seen enough of both to know which one was in front of me. This was genuine. Mr. Mitchell, I said, the contempt charge you're facing carries a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison. You understand that? The color left his face. 5 years. 5 years. I have discretion in sentencing. Here is how I intend to exercise it. The courtroom was completely still. You will serve 30 days in county jail for contempt of this court. You will serve every day of those 30 days. There will be no early release, no administrative adjustment, no phone calls that change the number. I paused. When you are released, you will return to face your reckless driving case. At that hearing, your license will be suspended for 1 year. You will pay a fine of $5,000 and you will complete 200 hours of community service working directly with at-risk youth. Those are the terms. Do you accept them? He nodded, tears running down his face without any apparent effort to stop them. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Don't thank me, I said. 30 days in jail is not a gift. It is a consequence. Use the time to decide what kind of person you actually want to be when you come out. That decision is yours. No one can make it for you. Not your father, not your attorney, not me. They took him back. The heavy door closed. Mayor Mitchell called me that evening. Judge Milian, he said, I wanted to call before the day ended to say thank you for arresting your son, for treating him like everyone else. For the first time in his life, someone with actual authority didn't step aside because of my name. He needed that. He has needed that for years, and I never gave it to him. A pause. I made those calls, Judge. I'm the one who got those tickets dismissed. I told myself I was protecting him, but I wasn't protecting him. I was protecting myself from having to watch him deal with the things I should have let him deal with a long time ago. You also called today, I said, and told me you wouldn't interfere. That's not nothing, Mayor. It's the least I could do, he said. It's the least I should have done years ago. Brandon Mitchell served all 30 days. The staff at the county facility told me he was a model inmate, respectful, quiet, not causing any problems. He apparently spent most of the time reading. The corrections officer who supervised his block, a woman named Delacqua, who had been doing that job for 11 years, mentioned to me later that in the second week, Brandon had asked for a job assignment in the laundry rather than sit idle, which surprised her since most people in his position spent their time counting hours instead of filling them. By the third week, he was teaching another inmate, a 19-year-old, who could barely read his multiplication tables during the hour they were allowed in the common room. Delacqua said she almost didn't believe it was the same young man from the intake photo, the one glaring into the camera like the whole process was beneath him. When he returned to my courtroom for the reckless driving hearing, I didn't recognize him for a moment. Jeans, a plain t-shirt, no designer suit, no practice slouch, no phone. He stood at the defendant's table with his hands folded and waited. Mr. Mitchell, I said, how was your time in custody? Horrible, Your Honor, he said, and necessary. I needed every day of it. Tell me what you took from it. He thought about that for a moment, actually thought about it rather than reaching for the rehearsed version. I learned that I'm not special, he said, that my father's position doesn't make me better than anybody else. That respect isn't something you're owed because of your last name. It's something you build day by day by how you actually treat people. And I learned that I've wasted 24 years being a person I wouldn't want to know. He paused. I don't want to be that person anymore. What are you doing differently? I enrolled in community college, he said. I got a job at a warehouse. $16 an hour, which is more honest money than I've ever had in my life. I moved out of my parents' house into a studio apartment. I'm paying my own bills for the first time. It's hard. It's actually hard. He looked up at me. And I feel better about myself than I have in years, possibly ever. I believed him. Sometimes you can just tell. Your 200 hours of community service, I said. Where do you want to serve them? At the youth detention center, he said without hesitating. Talking to kids who are heading down the same road I was on, telling them what it actually looks like when you think the rules don't apply to you and you finally hit the wall. That, I said, is an excellent choice. Approved. Over the following 6 months, Brandon completed his community service. The director of the youth detention center called me about halfway through. Judge Milian, she said, I don't know exactly what you did to this young man, but whatever it was, it worked. The kids actually listen to him. He tells them about the 30 days, about threatening a judge, about his license, about how his father's name didn't save him, and they believe him because he's not pretending it was easy, and he's not pretending he was a good person before it happened. She paused. He's volunteering extra hours. He brings his own money to buy pizza for the kids on Friday nights. He's mentoring 3 of them one-on-one. Judge, you changed this kid's life. One of those 3, she told me later, was a 15-year-old named Marcus, who had been picked up for shoplifting 3 times in a year and had a habit of shutting down completely whenever an adult tried to talk to him about it. Arms crossed, eyes on the floor, waiting for the lecture to end. Brandon didn't lecture him. He sat across from Marcus every Tuesday for 6 weeks and mostly just asked questions. What he liked, what he was good at, what he was actually scared of underneath the shoplifting. It came out eventually that Marcus had been stealing things he didn't even want, just to see if anyone would notice him at all. Brandon told him he understood that better than Marcus probably realized, that acting out until someone finally reacted was its own kind of thing he recognized in himself. By the end of the 6 weeks, Marcus had signed up for the center's after-school woodworking program and had asked on his own if Brandon would keep coming even after his community service hours ran out. Brandon still does. If you've made it this far and you want to see more cases where consequence creates change, subscribe to Justice Warrior because the story isn't finished yet. 1 year after his arrest, Brandon's license suspension ended. He came to my chambers to deliver something in person. He was wearing a collared shirt, had a job badge clipped to his pocket, and looked like a person who had somewhere to be that mattered to him. Your Honor, he said, I wanted to give you this. He handed me a letter, handwritten on lined notebook paper. It was from a 16-year-old he'd been mentoring at the detention center. A kid who'd been brought in for stealing a car and joyriding, who had been on a trajectory that was going to end somewhere considerably worse. The letter said, Brandon showed me that it doesn't matter who your parents are or how much money your family has. What you do catches up with you eventually. I was heading somewhere I wasn't going to come back from. Brandon helped me see that I could choose something different. He helped me get into a trade program. I'm learning electrical work now. I have something to look forward to. Because of Brandon, I have an actual future. Thank you for arresting him. It saved both our lives. I looked up from the letter. Brandon was crying again, but these were different tears entirely. The tears of someone who has done something genuinely good and is still a little surprised by it. Your Honor, he said, arresting me was the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me something my father never did. You gave me a consequence that was real. You showed me that privilege isn't a permanent exemption. It's actually a responsibility. And you kept me from becoming something I would have eventually hated completely. He steadied his voice. I'm grateful. I want you to know that. What are you doing now? I asked. Finishing my associate's degree, still at the warehouse. I got promoted to supervisor. I'm in a serious relationship with someone who knew me before all of this and somehow gave me another chance anyway. And I'm volunteering 15 hours a week with at-risk youth. He smiled. A real one. Nothing performed about it. I'm living an actual life for the first time, Your Honor. I'm proud of myself. I haven't been able to say that before. I'm proud of you, Brandon, I said, and I meant it. Mayor Mitchell came to my chambers the following day. He sat across from me and didn't try to fill the space immediately with words, which told me a great deal about how he'd changed too. Judge Milian, he said finally, I wanted to thank you in person for what you did for Brandon, what I should have done years ago. You're his father, I said. It wasn't your job to arrest him. No, he agreed, but it was my job to let him fail, to let him face what was coming to him. Instead, I made phone calls. I smoothed things over. I told myself I was being a good father, but I was actually just avoiding the discomfort of watching my son struggle. He paused. I created someone who thought the world would always bend for him, and it took a judge with no interest in bending to fix what I'd spent years building. You also, I said, picked up the phone on the first ring and told me you wouldn't interfere. A different kind of father might have done otherwise. He nodded slowly. Brandon and I have a real relationship now, he said. For the first time since he was small, we have dinner every week. We talk about things that are actually true. He respects me, not because I'm the mayor, but because I finally stopped running interference and let him become himself. He folded his hands. I'm not seeking re-election. 6 years as mayor, it's enough. It's time to be a father instead of a politician. I should have made that choice sooner. 2 years have passed since I arrested Brandon Mitchell in open court. He graduated with his associate's degree. He was promoted to warehouse supervisor. He married the woman who had seen him at his worst and decided he was worth staying for. And he founded a nonprofit called Second Chances, an organization that reaches out specifically to children of wealthy and connected families who are heading down the road Brandon was on, offering them something their privilege had never provided, an honest conversation about consequences before they meet them in a courtroom. There are hundreds of kids like I was, he told me at the nonprofit's launch. Rich kids who have never heard the word no and meant it. Kids who've learned that their parents' money or their parents' name will catch them every time they fall. I want to reach them before they fall in front of someone like you, before they end up in handcuffs for the same reason I did, because they genuinely couldn't imagine that was possible. Brandon Mitchell found that room. It cost him 30 days, a year without a license, $5,000, and 200 hours of his time. It gave him back his life. That is what justice looks like when it works. Not revenge, not punishment for the satisfaction of punishing, but consequence calibrated precisely to create change. 30 days in a holding cell did what 24 years of protection had actively prevented. It introduced Brandon Mitchell to reality. And reality, it turned out, was exactly what he needed. To every parent watching this, let your children fail. Let them face what they've chosen. Don't make the calls. Don't smooth the road. You are not helping them. You are borrowing against their future and charging them the highest possible interest rate. And to anyone watching this who has ever reached for a family name, a connection, a financial advantage, a relationship, as a reason why the rules shouldn't apply to them, remember this case. Remember a 24-year-old in a designer suit who threw that card on the table in a courtroom and watched it accomplish nothing because there are still judges who don't care about your last name. There are still rooms where the name on the door is law and it means exactly what it says. You're watching Justice Warrior. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs it. And remember, no one is above the law. Not the well-connected, not the wealthy, not the mayor's son. Respect the law and never, under any circumstances, threaten a judge. It doesn't end well.